Hi, friends. Welcome to session 6 in our ongoing study of how to learn to love our neighbor. And in this session, we talk about loving your neighbor for the duration. Notice this text in John 13 in the New Living Translation. Before the Passover celebration, Jesus knew that his hour had come to leave this world and return to his Father. He had loved his disciples during his ministry on earth, and now he loved them to the very end. Now that word translated end is the Greek word telos, and it can refer to three things. All three things give us a window that illuminate who Jesus is and who we are called to be and what it might look like to love our neighbor to the end. So number one, duration. When John says that Jesus loved them to the end, he's saying that Jesus' love had no time limit. He loved them to the end of time. Jesus' love didn't skip out the door at 5 p.m., finished for the day. Jesus loved all the way to the end of the time on the clock. Jesus spent all of his time loving. There would be no second, no minute, no hour when Jesus would look up and say, well, time's up. I'm finished. No more loving. And so one way of looking at this is John's commentary on the duration of Jesus' love. Jesus' love had no time limits. It was long lasting. We might think of the scene in Mark chapter 1. Jesus has had a long day of ministry, and there's still many people who need his help. And so even after the sun sets, Jesus loves. That evening after sunset, many sick and demon-possessed people were brought to Jesus. The whole town gathered at the door to watch. So Jesus healed many people who were sick with various diseases, and he cast out many demons. Now, that's not to say that Jesus didn't care for himself. Early the next morning, Jesus awakes and spends time alone with his Father. So Jesus knew how to set boundaries, how to make time for himself. But what the Gospels are showing us and what John is telling us when he says Jesus loved to the end is that Jesus loved all the time. From cover to cover in the Gospels, Jesus is loving. He loved until his dying breath. And so you might ask yourself this question: at what time am I least likely to love? I believe each of us has times during the day or during the week or specific seasons in our lives when we're less likely to love. Does love go with you when you go on vacation? Does love follow you to work? Is love around when no one else is looking? Barry Corey, the president of Biola University, wrote a long letter to alumni after the George Floyd murder on this subject. He wrote, "Sympathy with advocacy. This is what we need. Communities across the country, especially communities of faith, must travel this justice road together and in the same direction. We need to acknowledge it's a long road that takes tireless perseverance. History has shown that this road has too many rest stops, exit ramps, and U-turns. Too often," he says, "we accelerate with each shocking injustice and then decelerate, or merely inch forward when the headline fades. Too often, tragically, we stop altogether or even go the other direction. We need to travel the long road at a pace that does not let up and in a direction that is not rerouted." In other words, he's calling for a love that has no time limits, that keeps on going even through the difficulties. I want to invite you to reflect on this for your own life. At what time are you least likely to love? Maybe there's a time on the calendar. Maybe there's a time on the clock. Maybe there's a time over your lifespan. At what time are you least likely to love? Now, the word telos, Jesus loved them to the end, can also refer to type or kind. It's not just a commentary on the duration of Jesus' love, it's a commentary on the degree of Jesus' love. It's not just illuminating the lack of time limits on Jesus' love, but the lack of type limits on Jesus' love. The Greek word telos points to the types of people Jesus loved. There was no limit on who Jesus would love. Just look at those who make up his group of disciples, the people that he's present with when John writes this text. They were terribly imperfect men who would abandon him and betray him, and yet Jesus loved every one of them. He loved to the end. This is what Jesus is pushing for when he teaches in Matthew 5, "You have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you." In Jesus' day, people, even religious people, limited their love to certain types of people. They believed in that phrase, love your neighbor, but they didn't believe it applied to every neighbor, only certain types of neighbors, certainly not neighbors who were enemies. And so at a well in Samaria, Jesus acted lovingly toward a woman who was a Samaritan, and people were shocked, both because of her gender and her race. Jesus had no business loving someone like that. Jesus behaved lovingly toward little children when his own followers tried to shoo them away. There was no type of person Jesus did not love. Jesus refused to love one type and not another type. He had no time limits and no type limits. And so you might ask this question, what type of person am I least likely to love? Is your love poured out generously on people who are similar to you in terms of color or class or creed, but released in small quantities for others? Does someone's sexual orientation or place of birth or physical or mental capabilities throttle your love? What type of person am I least likely to love? When it comes to racial or ethnic diversity, when it comes to capabilities, when it comes to sexual orientation, when it comes to age, when it comes to politics, are you willing to love to the end? There's a third meaning to this Greek word telos. Jesus loved them to the end. It can also refer to destination. Paul Tarazi, a Palestinian scholar, proposes that telos in John 13 points to Jesus' goal or purpose, the telos toward which his entire life is moving. Jesus loved to the end, to the completion of this telos, to the completion of this goal, to the finish line of a path he's been walking on his entire life. You can think of Jesus' life on earth as a map and picture the destination Jesus is moving towards on that map. That destination is love, a love without limits. This is the destination Jesus is moving toward. And so he loved them toward that destination. Now, this is important because for many Christians, even today, anything related to this world is not our destination. Instead, our goal, our destination, our telos is to get to the good place. It's about getting to heaven. And as long as we've completed certain boundary behaviors like baptism or tithing or not drinking or attending church correctly, then we've completed the goal of the faith. And we can complete that goal without ever being loving. And so we might ask ourselves, what destination besides love am I aiming at? Is love really the destination I have in mind when I think about the journey of my life? In the 4th and 5th centuries after the death of Jesus, Christian women and men made homes in the desert of Egypt. They became known as the desert fathers and mothers, devoted to union with God through solitude and silence, and service to the world through prayer, spiritual direction, and writing. These hermits savored and shared surprising spiritual wisdom. One of them was named Abba Moses. As an Ethiopian, Moses was a person of color. So he's also known as Black Moses. Enslaved when he was a youth, he later came into contact with the desert fathers and mothers and devoted his life to a monastic lifestyle. His presence in this ancient community illuminates the African roots of the Christian faith and the vital role of people of color in Christian history. Here's Abba Moses, the Ethiopian. As a black man in a religious community in which he was a minority, Moses endured racial prejudice. One story describes a council of monks grumbling, "Why does this black man come among us?" Another story depicts the archbishop who ordained him treating him in racist ways. During the ordination ceremony, Moses was clothed in a white ephod, and the archbishop remarked, "See, Abba Moses, now you become all white." Undeterred, Moses gained a reputation for giving a voice to those who had none. One story tells about a council that was called to judge a monk for some crime. Moses was invited to join the panel of judges, but he refused to come. He wanted nothing to do with building walls between people. And so a messenger was sent begging him to attend, to be a judge. So Moses finally came, and as he walked, he carried a leaky jug with him. When he arrived, he had the jug on his back, and water was leaking out of it onto the sand behind him. Moses moved into the midst of the council, and he said, "My sins run out behind me, and I do not see them. And today I am coming to judge the errors of another." His parable silenced the council, and the accused brother was released. Now, one of his most widely quoted sayings may sound a little peculiar to us, but it sets the stage for loving our neighbor and a spiritual practice that moves us toward that. While Moses was in Sketis, our brother came to him and begged him for a word. And here's what Moses said: "Go, stay inside your cell, and your cell will teach you all things." Now, the cell that Moses was talking about was a small space within a larger living space where monks practiced solitude, reading, meditation, prayer. This was not a space filled with comfortable recliners or a mini refrigerator or cold drinks or savory snacks or a 12-foot window opening out onto some mountain vista with pristine lake waters. It was just the opposite. The cell was considered a furnace, a crucible. And Moses' advice was to stay in that cell and allow it to teach us all things. Now, the cell, as Moses uses it here, is a symbol. It stands for a person's willingness to stay, to endure, to persist in practices to which they've been called, even if they are inconvenient or uncomfortable. We might call that cell sitting. The desert fathers and mothers had been called to solitude and prayer, and cell sitting meant persisting in solitude and prayer, even in the face of discomfort. We've been called to love God and to love our neighbor as ourselves. Cell sitting means persisting in this love, even if it becomes painful or protracted, loving our neighbor to the end. Cell sitting is what Jesus did. He loved in ways that were enduring. Becoming churches and Christians who love people as Jesus did to the end, with an enduring and persistent love, requires discipline and discomfort. It doesn't happen simply by signing a letter or writing a post or participating in some online discussion. Those are good steps, but what's needed is also determination to enter into long-lasting ways of rethinking and reliving. And so Abba Moses is still speaking. Go, stay inside your cell, and your cell will teach you all things. So first, go, especially as it relates to loving your neighbor as you love yourself. What person or group is God challenging you to go and demonstrate a long-lasting love for? In what way is he challenging you to show that love? The call here is to get up and go. Go and love your neighbor to the very end. Go and stay. Stay. As best you can, set an intentional, long-lasting goal regarding the person, the neighbor that God has called you to love. How long are you willing to love them? A month? A quarter? Half a year? A year? Longer? Stay at it. And your cell will teach you all things. In other words, as you engage in these persistent forms of love toward your neighbor, take time to reflect regularly. What is God teaching you through your persistent determination to remain in that cell of love? I hope you find encouragement to go and to love your neighbor to the end. God bless you.